So glad to be sharing my story with you all today. Most of you know Adam and I were married a year ago. It's been a great year, but I also was quite sick off and on over the past year. Throughout the past year, we experienced a lot of uncertainty because we really were not sure what my future would be. My talk today is to reflect on that journey with all of you. One of the challenges that I faced had been convinced that staying positive is what always got me through this challenging time. I have lost count of how many times I was rushed to the hospital, how many times I felt alone, afraid, and at the edge of losing hope. I always tried to keep a positive outlook. Things were gonna get better. But this time that wasn't working. And I wondered how I could cope with this awful. The idea that we always have to be positive despite our circumstance is not always viable. I had to rethink this approach of life, and over the past 3 years, the challenges I have called for a different way of approaching things. I have had a lot of time to think about a new perspective and want to share some of that with you today. Though I couldn't verbalize it, I had deep questions about my faith. At the root of my concern was, where is God right now? I was in the most pain I ever remember being in, and I couldn't understand why God was allowing this to happen. Many people were praying for healing. Does praying for healing not work? I was struggling to make sense of my situation. This drawing surprised me. I drew this the day I got home from a month-long stay in the hospital. The experience I had there was very difficult because things had not gone well in my surgeries. I was really confused and hurt. At the time, I was not able to verbalize my feelings about the events that had happened to me. The drawing captures some of my experiences. The black scribbles represent my scattered brain and the chaos I was feeling. The red dots represent all the needles that I had received, and during my medical crisis, I had also received 3 blood transfusions. Blood and chaos were at the core of my experience. I have organized this talk around the theme of separation. Separation is a key issue for persons with disabilities. What is separation? Separation is not having a community around you to support you and lift you up. Physical separation, emotional separation, social separation, and spiritual separation. Physical separation. The experience of physical separation is a common experience for people with disabilities. We are cut off from our community through various barriers that we face each day. This is accentuated at times of physical illness. When I was in the hospital, I was extremely isolated. This was during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. I was only allowed my parents as visitors, and my fiance wasn't even allowed to come and see me. This made me feel extremely lonely. This time in the hospital was very discouraging, not only because I was isolated physically, I was exposed to the COVID virus in the ICU and actually got the virus while I was there. While I received good care in the hospital, this was a low point. I was physically alone, psychologically alone, and vulnerable to COVID. Through my life, I have experienced different kinds of physical separation. Barriers to buildings is a big factor in our churches and homes. These barriers create further isolation. We need to advocate to remove barriers to keep persons with disabilities that keep persons with disabilities in their isolated worlds. Emotional separation. Negative self-talk and diminished self-image can erode our sense of emotional well-being. I was not only isolated, but I was alone with many negative feelings. Feelings of anger pushed out my natural positivity. I was angry with the hospital for exposing me to COVID-19. I was angry with God, feeling like He had abandoned me. These feelings of sadness, loss, and anger grew inside of me. I couldn't really even think straight, and I was losing hope every day. What is involved with emotional separation? Over time, a disabled young person may internalize a negative self-concept that requires the kindness and support of a community. Emotional separation is related to one's self-image. Although I try very hard to be a positive person, the difficulties of emotional separation are real and challenging. I think it is most important for the church not only to be inclusive, but to work at becoming a caring community that offers continual support and emotional support. No group is perfect, and you won't always get it right. But part of what I experienced reminds us that we must try our best to create an emotionally safe space and allow our deeper questions about God to emerge in the church. This brings me to the third layer of separation, social separation. Social separation occurs over time when we fail to act inclusively. Persons with disabilities may begin to feel excluded from fellowship. Here's an important disability text from the Bible, Luke chapter 5, verses 18 to 25. Some men came carrying a paralyzed man on a mat and tried to take him into the house to lay him before Jesus. When they could not find a way to do this because of the crowd, they went up on the roof and lowered him on his mat through the tiles in the middle of the crowd, right in front of Jesus. When Jesus saw their faith, he said, "Friend, your sins are forgiven." The Pharisees and the teachers of the law began thinking to themselves, "Who is this fellow who speaks blasphemy? Who can forgive sins but God alone?" Jesus knew what they were thinking and asked them, "Why are you thinking these things in your heart? Which is easier to say, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or say, 'Get up and walk'? But that you may know the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." He said to the paralyzed man, "I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home." Immediately he stood up in front of them, took what he had been lying on, and went home praising God. A lot of people I know have stories like this man's story in the Gospel of Luke. We have stories of people going the extra mile to help us, and that is so encouraging. One of the many stories I can think of that shows this compassion is from when I was in junior high. I had a really great teacher. He loved to take the kids out on field trips. He often took his students on hikes. When I was in his class, he wanted me to be able to participate. So he came up with a trail rider, I would sit in it, kind of like a modern chariot, and 4 people would each hold a handle on the side, and I could go along on the trails on the hike with the class. The teacher expanded the community by making a way to include me. Things are improving in our society. Buses have become fully accessible, and most businesses have either a push button or a ramp. But there's still a long way to go. There are some frustrations that those of us with physical disabilities have to deal with. I can't tell you how many times I've decided not to do something or go somewhere with friends for fear of it not being accessible. Or sometimes we are not included. People simply do not understand that we are capable, so we often are not asked to go along. The final area of separation I want to mention is spiritual separation. Spiritual separation is the experience of losing connection with God and the spiritual life in general. This was at the heart of my experience. I would say that the deepest part of my experience was the feeling of being abandoned by God. I was alone physically, emotionally, and socially, and I was in a lot of pain. And when I was alone, I felt like God was not there. I remember at one point asking my dad if I was dying. I felt like I was, and I was losing my hope. Where was God in my journey? I felt like I was losing my faith. My crisis experience began to heal when I began to realize that the community of people around me was cheering me on and praying for me. When I finally was able to get out of isolation and experience more and more community, I realized that even in the dark times, I had hope. The challenges remain for all the types of separation. My own answer to where is God when it hurts? He is there with us. He is there inspiring all of us to be the community that others need. In solidarity with other persons with disabilities who have experienced these forms of separation, I want to close with a song. It expresses something of my restored faith, even in the times of the awful.
Shattered like you've never been before. The life you knew in 1,000 pieces on the floor. And words fall short in times like these, when this world drives you to your knees. You think you're never gonna get back to the you they used to be. Tell your heart to beat again. Close your eyes and breathe it in. Let the shadows fall away. Step into the light of grace. Yesterday's a closing door. You don't live there anymore. Say goodbye to where you've been, and tell your heart to beat again. Beginning, just let that word wash over you. It's alright now. Love's healing hands have pulled you through. So get back up, take step one. Leave the darkness, feel the sun. 'Cause your story's far from over, and your journey's just begun. Tell your heart to beat again. Close your eyes and breathe it in. Let the shadows fall away. Tell your heart to beat again. Let every heart break and every scar be a picture that reminds you who has carried you this far. 'Cause love sees farther than you ever could. In this moment, heaven's working everything for your good. Tell your heart to beat again. Close your eyes and breathe it in. Let the shadows fall away. Step into the light of grace. Yesterday's a closing door. You don't live there anymore. Say goodbye to where you've been and tell your heart to beat again. Your heart to beat again. Beat again. Oh, so tell your heart.